Okay, welcome back. This is session 2 covering the Maximo JSON API. And today's session will be an introduction to using the API to get or query data from Maximo. Consider this the basics type of session where we'll cover the beginner basic topics that you need to know. We'll have a follow-up session that'll go into what you might think of as more advanced topics. Let me jump over to my browser, and picking up where I left off in the getting started session. I have a Maximo here. Just so you know, I logged in that other Maximo. Actually, I timed out, so let me log in. I'm reusing this connection for this session, so I don't have to pass it through on each request. But this view here is the API metadata for the MX asset. So if you remember, key things on when you look at the API meta for an object structure is two key sections, the query capability and the creation factory. And today we're talking about query capability, and we're focused mainly on that primary query URL named all, and this is the one that will retrieve all assets. Keep in mind there are capabilities to support saved queries. You can see one here called public assets, but we'll cover that at a different point. So let's just start with this URL here. And so right away I can see, if you remember, just as a reminder, by default, the OSLC API imported namespacing, and this API, we recommend that you don't bother with that. And so if you put the leen equals one query parameter, that eliminates all the namespacing. So when you look at this, and just so you know, now that I've done it, as long as I keep this session open, I don't need to keep providing that parameter. Let's look at this. I have a list of URLs here. These are all different unique assets within Maximo. That identifier at the end identifies each unique asset. And one of the things we want to do initially, you likely would want to do, is I got a huge list here. How many do I have? So if you do a collection count, a query parameter for collection count, and I scroll down to the bottom, it gives me a total count here. So I get 682 assets in this query based on my user. Next would be, likely you don't want to see 682. You're querying for a subset. So let's start with a simple where clause. So we provide an OSLC.where, and I'm going to say status equals the operating. I expect to get a lot here, but we'll see how many we get. I guess I got to type it in right here. Got to wrap it in a double quote. Okay, so now I have a smaller list of assets. I took the count off, so I'm not sure how many, but this just basically gives me all the assets that are status of operating. So if I click one, gives you all the details. If I scroll down here, you can see here's my status equal operating. So let's go back to the collection. So we're looking at what we call a collection versus each one of these is what you call an individual resource. This is a collection of resources, the view you're looking at here. So in addition to the filtering the list by a value, oftentimes you want to see what's there in terms of a few properties that tell you something about the asset. So I'm going to put on another parameter called OSLC select, and I'm going to ask for the select number of fields. I want asset number, location, and status. So when I make this request, it's querying each of these assets again, but in the response, it's going to include the fields I asked for in the OSLC select. So the where clause filtered down to only those with a status of operating. The select clause then gives you some attributes. So you can see asset num, the description of the status. We give both the status and the description, the location, the description of the asset itself. And then in addition, you're getting all the links to the child objects that are part of this object structure. Now, these links don't necessarily mean there's data at each one of those child objects, but it does tell you that if there is data, that's the link you can retrieve those. So this is a way to basically filter down your list of assets and only select a certain subset of fields with the asset. And again, I equate this to the Maximo list tab where I look at my asset list. Normally it's filtered down. You might have it as a pre-saved query, or you just put a value at the top of one of the columns, and then we return you just a subset of the columns based on how that dialog is configured with whichever columns. Okay, one thing that is new, this would probably be 7604, but I'll bring it up here, is the property. If you've been involved or used the OSLC API before now, possibly you worked with Maximo anywhere. OSLC had two concepts of retrieving properties with a resource. One is the OSLC select and one is called OSLC properties. The idea was with OSLC select you would use when you're viewing a collection of assets, like I am here, I'm viewing multiple assets. The OSLC properties would be used if you're viewing a single asset. So if I went into the href here on this asset, I'm getting asset 1080, one single asset. If I only wanted a subset of columns here, I could do OSLC properties. So there was two different query parameters, one for a collection and one for an individual asset. And you use different query parameters when you wanted to basically get the same capability, a certain list of columns. We've changed the API recently so that you can use either one with a collection or either one for an individual asset. It was mainly usability. Everybody's kind of new to the API, and people would forget they'd be using select on an individual asset and properties on a collection. They wouldn't get any data back, and they didn't understand why. And a lot of times what you'll see is when you use a property that is not valid, it doesn't tell you an error, it just doesn't use it, it ignores it. That's the same thing if you also mistype properties, or excuse me, I meant query parameters. So just keep that in mind. If you put in a query parameter, you mistype it, and it doesn't seem like it's working, it doesn't tell you it isn't working, it just doesn't make use of the parameter because it doesn't understand what it is. So this is something that's actually new. Properties in OSLC properties and OSLC select, they're interchangeable now. So we just want to let you know that. Let's go a step further. So I'm going to go back. I guess I'll go back to OSLC select. That matters. And one thing you can do here is, I'll just make the URL shorter. What I'm going to do is put asset meter, the curly bracket, and I'm going to put meter name and close the curly bracket. So what I'm saying here is when I retrieve the data, I want the asset number and I want the meter, or however many meter names that are associated with the asset. So I'm going down to a child object. I'm going to have to scroll through here and see. So here's one. So let me back up here. So here's asset 11250. These are the URLs, and then you can see within 11250 it has 2 meters, hold pressure, and run hours. So again, using OSLC select, I'm going after individual columns. In this case, I'm going after columns from both the root object, the asset, I'm getting asset num, and now I'm pulling something from one of the child objects, asset meter. Let me jump back up. Another thing relative to the size of the collection and how much data you get, there's a parameter that basically lets you control the response in a paging format. You can put OSLC page and give how many resources in the collection to return per page. Okay, so here's what I just talked about. Here's an example of I put the query parameter in wrong. I didn't spell it right. And so it just ignored it. I have a full list of, it didn't do any kind of paging. So it's page size with a capital S. And now you can see I get only 3 resources back. And then if you look down below, if you could see this, there is a next page link. So if I go to the next page, it gives me the next page, next three. And then also now I have a next page and a previous page. So this is a way to control the amount of data you get back in a single response. And if you were building some kind of application, a user interface type of application, you might want to let the user dictate how much to return on a per page perspective in order to control the performance of the application by limiting how much comes back on a page by page basis. Now let me show you an order by, I jumped over to Notepad just because of the length of this URL is a bit long and I wanted you to see it. So basically I'm doing MX asset, I'm selecting 3 fields off of the asset there. I have a status, my status equals operating. And then my order by is on the asset number descending where the minus sign is. So if I take this URL, what it'll do is it'll reach out, grab the assets and return them. And if you look at the asset numbers, they're in a descending order. So there's V1050, V1044, V1043, and so on. So you can add an order by in order to get the data back in a sorted order. Again, just like clicking on the column header in a list tab so that you can see the data sorted in a certain way. I'm back over in Notepad. I just wanted to show you, comment on a couple of things around the where clause, just so you know. On this where clause here, where status equals operating, depending on what you're using for fields, if it's numeric or not. And this is in the document, but basically, you have equal, you have not equal, you have greater than, less than, greater than, less than, equal, greater than, equal. We support as well as like. I just wanted you to be aware these are documented in the get document, so you can take a look there. But I just wanted to mention those. And back in Notepad, and I wanted to show you one specific thing. Querying for null and not null values, so very specific. So if you're looking, so what I'm doing, I'm selecting asset and location. I'm looking for MX asset, getting the asset number location. And this first one where I say location equals star or asterisk, what that's doing is how that's treated is basically giving me all the assets where the location value is not null. So equal asterisk means not null, and that would return a list of assets. And if you look at this list, the location field's in there, and you can see everyone's filled in. Going back to Notepad, if you go not equal asterisk, that should give you everything. That should give you all the assets where there's no location for that asset. And as I mentioned earlier, the API by default returns only attributes that have a value. So in this list of assets, you don't see the location attribute at all because it's null. These are the 2 statements down here, how you search for null and not null. So this wraps up session 2 on the JSON API get HTTP GET. As I said before, the plan is to provide a follow-up session, possibly 2, that will go deeper into the more advanced features of querying data out of Maximo using the API.